I think in my industry, in the film industry, they say never spoil a nice moment. So now that I wanted to say a few things about Mr. Bradman Weerakoon, but now that Bandula has said it so eloquently and with a personal story, I'll kill it if I start saying anything. So without any further ado, may I invite Mr. Bradman Weerakoon to.
For those words of welcome and remembrance. I'll come back to Bandula in a minute. But Ananda, it's such a pleasure to be here. It's an occasion really for a lot of celebration. You have done enough things, I think, in your life to, especially as an author, not only as a trade unionist and all the other activities that were mentioned, but as an author in this short period of 4 years to produce 3 books. That's something I think of remarkable value. And what you've done is to produce them of extraordinary quality. May I just say one thing about the production itself. When I looked at this book, and I'm a fair connoisseur of books because I've traveled a lot, and as somebody mentioned, 1954 was my first Prime Minister, so I'm 80 years old. In those years of travel, I haven't come across many books which attracted me so much on first glance. I mean, as soon as you see a book like this, you think, my goodness, this is something. It's large enough, full enough, and beautifully done. So congratulations to the producers of this. Foremost publishers are really foremost, if they can do this. I thought to myself that if I saw this in any of the bookshops in the big cities, or any of the bookshops in the airports of London, Frankfurt, Rome, Paris, wherever, you would want to look at this, because this stands out so excellently. So, straight off, the quality of the book itself, cover and the back pages and so on. Contents later. It's a very special occasion to celebrate a launch of a book. And when I look at the audience, very eminent people seated around here, I get a sense of how attractive your books are already, the books you've already produced. So you have a name that you can be proud of, which attracts the reader merely by the fact that there is a book coming from you. That's rather rare. I must confess myself that I didn't really know of the existence of Ananda Liyanage until rather recently. And that was due to my own ignorance of looking at the range of books. I was limited to a limited number, and there's other work to do as well. So, though I love books, and I've been reading books from the time I was 9 years old, I didn't actually get to Ananda's books yet. Maybe because there's so much production going on. You read so much the Indian books, you read so many of the South African books, or the African writers, or the Caribbean writers, and you're not reading really your own, except for those few people who go to the Gaul literary cultural thing, or have won Gratian Awards and so on. So Ananda's books did not come into my ken, did not come into my vision. But I must say that when I started reading them, and I started reading Deception, and then read the whole of Vengeance before this launch, I told myself that here is a new star, somebody who should be recognized and will be recognized for his ability at storytelling. Writing is probably composed of different qualities, and I think I'm a writer, but I write mainly of experiences that I've seen and done over my years. So I write about prime ministers, I write about presidents, I write biographies. But to write out of imagination is another act. I mean, it's a real act of creation. I think you really create when you imagine situations and write. And I said, because you go into your book a little more, and I'll talk about that as well, you find that here is a very active creator. He's telling you new things, giving you new information on the way, but also getting you to think. And I think that quality is something that you're inborn with. It took a long time for it to come out, then you only wrote from 4 years ago. But this is a talent, a creative talent that you have, which you have to now give to the world. It would be wrong to keep it to yourself, so write and keep writing. In fact, somebody was saying that you had written your 4th book before he could even finish reading your 3rd book. So you probably are writing faster than people can read them, which is remarkable. And that's your capacity to invent, to think, and to come up with new ideas. I've met you personally over the last 3 or 4 months and greatly enjoyed every encounter. Every time I meet you, I tell myself, my goodness, here's somebody who has creativity, passion, ability, and he does it all with some disability as well. You don't worry about the disability. I don't think you want to be reminded about that disability. You just go on and do it, and I think that's remarkable. So you are a very phenomenal person, and you are a new phenomenon, new star in the firmament of Sri Lanka, and I wish you very well in all that you do in the future. Your book itself, I think when one discusses books at a book launch, it's usual to say something about the author, and many have said it already, and I've said some things. It's usual to say something about the fact that that the book says something new, and you do, and you also talk about that fact of how relevant you are. And the relevance is important. You can write books on various subjects, but where is the relevance of what the writer is writing about? And in Ananda's book on the vengeance, I think this whole idea of relevance, how contemporary are you, how valid are you in what you are saying, and how useful are you to people at this time. I think when you look at your book here, you are dealing with a period of our social history, which is very relevant to all of us. I don't know whether many of you have had any chance of seeing any summary of the book. I probably not, because I don't think it's been come up, nobody's come up with it. And I don't want to get deep into it, because that will deprive the reader finally of the real thrill of discovery. One of the great things about reading is such a wonderful personal pleasure. It's not public. You take it away, you go to a corner, you go to your bed, or you go to a room somewhere and you read. And it's a communication between the author and yourself. And I think that's the greatest part of it, that you can do it silently. Nobody else does speak, there's no music, there's no words, and you're reading and understanding it and trying to communicate the writer with you, the reader. That's a huge thrill for me, and I'm sure for every reader. So when you do that, it has to become something which strikes and resonates in you. It has to resonate. That's what it says must be critical to you to be really important. And I think you've got that facility. You've chosen an episode or period which is very important to Sri Lankans. The period when we've just gone through a great national crisis, a crisis which lasted 30 years, and in which I was involved very personally at different times. So I could get a good judgment of how does the writer perceive that situation. And I think you looked at it remarkably objectively. Very objective. Here is a situation on which people take sides. There's polarization between one group and another group on the whole activity of what happened in the 30 years. And you've been very objective about it. In fact, a lesser writer might have written about the actual conflict itself. But you have said, no, I'm not writing about that. I'm writing about the post-conflict. And you're writing about what the book says, vengeance, the idea of vengeance. If, for example, a group felt that something had to be revenged or avenged, so you have vengeance. And the vengeance here is what the Tamil group, who had been defeated in the conflict, would think and do to try and avenge the defeat. So you hit upon something which maybe works in many minds. People who feel, yes, the war's over, but is it likely that some people who've escaped or left behind during the conflict might one day agitate, come up and do something which is very harmful to Sri Lanka and to all of us. And I think that's the meat that you get into that kind of area, which must have been the thought in everybody's mind. I think all of us who lived through these 30 years must have sometimes felt, well, thank God that's over. The conflict is over and done with. But is it all done with? Is there something lurking around? Is something lurking around outside and inside? And the whole book is about this wonderful plots, a series of plots which interlock with each other, which bring together finally the idea that yes, there was a build-up of a great plot which was nipped in the bud due to the ability of remarkably courageous individuals serving the local police, Indian police, international police, and so on. And within that scenario, you sketch a very, very arresting, interesting story. You're a remarkable storyteller. I have a lot of experience in reading books, more than the experience of writing. I've written a few books too on these prime ministers and so on. But reading is something I've done from the age of 9. In fact, the use of my glasses, I'm told, by my mother, is that I was reading at the age of about 3, sleeping on the floor, reading the newspaper. Maybe at that time newspapers were worth reading. And the 3-year-old boy was on the ground, on his belly, looking at the pages and trying to read. And at the age of 9, I was blind almost, so I took to get new glasses. It didn't affect me very much. I managed to struggle along and play cricket and so on with the glasses. But that was the price I paid for reading. I read in bad light, good light, everywhere. In the night, in the morning, in the bed, outside and so on. And so I know something about reading. And I must say that I couldn't put it down, you know. There were periods when I couldn't put it down. I just read and I said, okay, I'll put it by, and little early in the morning, late at night, in the middle of the night, one reads. And there was this thing drawing you on. It was drawing you on. And that's the great thing about it. You read, and the chapter ends, but you don't stop there. You want to get to the next chapter. So you read a little bit of that, and then you get tired and you stop it because you're physically tired, but you're not mentally tired. So it's great. It's a great read, and I'm sure everybody who looks at it, and there must be a lot of aficionados, the people who are the lovers of Ananda's books who are also here, they will love it. You will love it. Okay, so you have relevance there. It's contemporary. It deals with contemporary problems, so you can satisfy that part of a writer's urge to be contemporary, to be meaningful to people who read. There's creativity in it. There's art in it. Let me say one thing. There is knowledge in it too. Creation generally are creative imagination, things of imagination, which don't give the reader much information and real knowledge. Now today they talk about information overload. There's too much information in the world. I mean, you look at internet or Google or emails, people are sending you all the time there's information coming in. Much of it is irrelevant information. So you have to select what is the information you need. Now here, whenever you travel and you have the characters in this book, and you told me about the characters, there's a lady called Sandani, and I'm sure there's a Sandani in the audience also, right? So whoever Sandani is, she'll be happy to know that she's in the book too. He chose his characters from people whom he really knows. There are real life people also here. These characters travel around the world, and when they travel, you put into their thoughts and minds the historical knowledge of the places they go to. And if somebody goes to the British Museum, there is a fairly good coverage of what the British Museum is about. Or if somebody sails in the Grecian islands and goes to the Acropolis, a famous known place in Greek history, you have a description of the Acropolis here. Or in Sri Lanka, if you go to Mulkirigala, as we all do sometime or other, there is a very excellent description of Mulkirigala, its various maluas and what you find on each of them. So it's full of information too. And I think that's interesting to many readers. Many readers aren't aware of this. Some readers are, and those who are, well, it's knowledge that they already have. But if you are not, you get something extra by having a look at that part of the book. As you're reading, you get into that. I think you're relevant too, because we are now a globalized society. And I'll give you little snippets of what is in the book, but I can't give you the whole because it's not fair. You see, it talks about we are globalized people now. Our people go to other countries, our domestics are working somewhere else, migrants are there. If you look at a newspaper today, particularly the obituary, and you see anybody's name there, Mr. So-and-so, he's got a brother in Toronto, he's got a sister in Brisbane, he's got a daughter studying in Yorkshire, somebody else in Houston, Texas. It's amazing. Everybody, all these families are connected with the whole world. So that's globalization for me. And we are constantly bombarded with information through the net and the television of other events. So we are very globalized. Now your book takes people on this global. Now your book takes people on this global journey. Sandani goes to England. Sandani goes to England on an archaeological or historical survey, goes to the museum, meets Kevin, who's a British security man, and then they get married, separate, come back again. There's a whole lot of beautiful things happening there between the Sri Lankan woman and the British man. Now that's an interesting part of a fictional effort which really replicates what's happening in society. A lot of people are doing that. A lot of young people are going out and marrying, the intermarriage is taking place. Or you have travel, a great deal of travel is going on. Travel to Europe, travel to the Mediterranean, travel to India, travel to see places of interest in Sri Lanka. Anuradhapura, Bandula, you mentioned many times the experience of Anuradhapura and of the sacred poetry. And you go into history, there is a very interesting reversion back over 2,500 years or so to a historical event which occurs in the time of Dutu gathering, where the sacred boat tree is the point at which a message of protection comes out. People go to the boat tree and then they get a message that something might befall Sri Lanka which is of great significance. And then the Dutu prepares for it, and it is the impending invasion by Elara's brother from India. So there is a warning, and then he meets it and stops it. And the same kind of thing happens here when Sanani goes to the Bomaluwa and is in meditation there and receives a message from the vibrations around the sacred boat tree, which tell her that there could be great danger in the act of vengeance by a Tamil group who are angry or angered at the fact that they have lost the war. And that alerts people around the world, and it's a beautiful idea of great imagination of how it can work. But the historical connections are also there. So there is the thought that what's happened now and today did happen in the past, and the link between these is the fact that Sri Lanka has in Anuradhapura the Bo sapling which came from the Buddha Gaya, Bo tree under which Lord Buddha attained enlightenment. So there are very interesting religious parallels to this. I thought of what are the other, what genre? The word genre is used in talking on literature, and it usually refers to where do we categorize you? Where do we categorize a book like this? Is it historical? It's certainly not romance. It's not horror. I think it comes within that range of things which are called mystery. The mystery books, the mystery fiction, which is talking about mysteries. It reminded me very much of Da Vinci Code. I don't know if you got any inspiration from the Da Vinci Code, but that's an amazing book too, with Dan Brown. If you are familiar with these works, you know. Da Vinci Code is very much spoken about. Later a film came out too, and films are never as good as the book. But Da Vinci Code was looking again also at sort of historical and mysteries. And that mystery was about the mystery of another religious leader, Jesus Christ, and the fact of whether, very interesting thought there, which raised a lot of hairs among the Catholic Church, that Jesus in fact was married, had a wife, and that Mary Magdalene, who was possibly not a very the woman with a great repute, was his wife. So it angered a lot of people. But that story is linked by Dan Brown to the whole Da Vinci Code. And Da Vinci, who was this great painter, apparently had the code was that in the picture of the Last Supper, there is a sign there which shows that one of the apostles who looks like somebody else is really Mary Magdalene. This is a very interesting way in which Dan Brown tried to bring in that story, the historical story, with the modern. And then he got into a whole lot of modern stories which are all about intrigue and murder and so on and so forth. Now you deal with intrigue and murder and assassination and all of the concepts which we are very familiar with. We are very familiar with those concepts today. But you deal with it very gently and very nicely. People are done away. There's even a word called a terminator. Now, the word terminator, that's the end of the game. Terminate, I terminate. So there's somebody who can pull out a pistol and shoot somebody. He's a terminator. He's terminator, that chap's life. So you talk about terminators, you talk about sleepers. I thought sleepers were those things on which rails ran and trains ran. Sleepers are people who are quiet for a long time and get activated if you want something done which anybody thought anybody else knowing. So you can have a sleeper in Singapore, as you have, who is activated after the conflict to shoot somebody or take some message or give some parcel. Very interesting. But all fairly well-known terms of today, for those who know them, sleepers. I think we know the word safe houses. Haven't you heard a lot about safe houses? That means where the LTT, when it's operating here, could come from wherever one you're where and live in Kotahena or in Belawat. They had a safe house. Safe because it was run as something else, as a tutorial or a boarding school or something. These chaps would also go in there. So all those, but I was trying to say that you are very relevant and you strike a lot of images in your mind. Hey, we know about that, we know about that. Isn't it fairly close to what happened there? So I think that's an area which you satisfy eminently about relevance and being contemporary. And you get a whole lot of reader interest. You are full of information. What is there which you are short on? Because I think it will be unfair not to say that. I thought that your descriptions sometimes of events was a little long drawn out. And I say it only because I would like the action to be quicker. It's only for that reason. I mean, your action is very fast paced. And then sometimes you very rarely you tend to go a little slower, so you're wanting to go faster. So you tend to skip over and try to read faster because there is some conversation which is really not. It is relevant, of course. Everything is relevant in the book, but one would think I can pass over that. So it might mean a shorter book finally. If you're going for the Booker Prize, for example, you're going for an English title or an award, maybe a little shorter book. Because I was reminded of that happened to a book called Chinaman. I don't know whether many of you have heard of Chinaman. There is a glorious book on cricket and all of the kind of shady side of cricket. Cricket is a very noble, straight game, as Sanghakara was talking about. But there's another shady side to it. And Chinaman is a great book written by a Sri Lankan called Shehan Karnatilaka on cricket. And Chinaman there means nothing to do with China and the Chinese. It's to do with a kind of bowling which is called a left-hand googly. A left-handed bowler bowling a googly is called a Chinaman. So it's that Chinaman he's writing about. So if you want to emulate Chinaman, Ananda, Chinaman has been abridged to go as a prospective Booker Prize. So that may be the one thought I leave with you as just as a kind of a little bit on the negative, but most of it is very, very positive. I don't want to say more. I don't know what you expect from a keynote speech. I've gone all over the place. But that is what I want to say about you, about your book. I enjoyed it. Most of you will enjoy it. And I want to thank you very much for having invited me to be here. I've had a great time being here and listening to these wonderful stories. Bandula has been talking about Lankagam and the 8 unders I crossed over when I was much younger.